All right. Week 5 of college football for Stupid versus the Spread. We'll recap some of this past week. Pretty good week. We'll talk about it, and then we'll get into this coming week 5, college football. Exciting stuff. We had a lot of conference play last week. We'll just kind of dive into it. The big losses from this week. So Arkansas loses to A&M. OU loses to Kansas State, who is ranked. And Texas loses to Texas Tech. Always a huge rivalry. I have some thoughts, but Mike, if you were to give I think this is like a good loss for one team, or really two teams maybe, and then a bad loss for one. But I'm curious to see what you had about OU Kansas State, because I think Kansas State's a lot better than people think.
Yeah, I think the Tulane loss the week before threw everybody off their radar, but no, they're a good team. I think Adrian Martinez played really well,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of willed them to win that game. This is a loss like more recent. These are the Lincoln Riley losses that you usually see coming. Um, I guess they've continued to Brent Venables. I think what's uncharacteristic is the way that defense just didn't play well in this one. So I mean, I think it's one that he'll get out of his system. I think OU's still in pretty good shape. Um, and I think the same thing with Arkansas. Arkansas, that's a soul crushing loss for them because they definitely wanted to beat A&M and to lose the way that they
Yeah.
lost that game. Really is just a gut punch to that program.
A kick bouncing off the top of the upright and falling short. I've watched football for a very long time. I've never seen a kick hit the top of the upright. That
Yeah, uh,
arguably worse than like the Bears double doink from like five
yeah, it
years
has
ago.
to be more impossible to do, right? Like I
Yeah,
don't know
Bears
what the
are-
odds are of being able to hit that trajectory exactly the way that he hit it, but
yeah.
um, a crushing loss for them, but a one that they got to get over it fast because Alabama comes to town this week, and
Yeah.
if the, there would be no better way to salvage that loss than to beat Alabama at home.
Or
Uh,
I think even playing them tight would. I know there's a lot of diehard fans who are like, "Hey, we're not going against the
yeah,
spread."
we're not, yeah, but I think that ultimately them getting over it would have. This is the worst spot for them to play Alabama. Like ideally, they'd have a week where they play like Missouri and beat and kick them,
Yeah,
up and down the
beat
field,
the shit
and
out
then
of them and then play
yeah.
Alabama.
Um, no, but for Texas, I mean, when is this going to stop happening in Texas? Like,
I think never, because they're going to the SEC, so like they should kind of get used to what's happened.
yeah, but I mean, like, but
You know
Sark
what I mean? Like,
Sark bought himself a lot of time by signing Arch Manning as long as Manning stays committed. But at some point, the people down there have to be looking around and going like, when are we going to stop losing these games? When are we going to stop losing to the Texas Techs and the TCUs and the Kansases and all these teams that they play throughout the year that end up with them going 7-5 because they can't beat the run of the mill Big 12 teams. And yes, Texas Tech is a different team, has played like a different team at home, but Houston's probably not as good as we thought they were. Uh, I think Texas Tech is probably closer to the team that got demolished by NC State than they are the team that beat Houston. So to go out and play that way against Texas Tech, and they love beating Texas. That is like what they live for. This
oh,
was
they fucking hate that. So I think my point, like last week, stands where I was like, Texas should win this game, but don't underestimate how much hate there is, especially like one-sided hate for Texas from
yeah.
Tech. You saw it at the game, like fans giving the players like the horns down and shit. I think OU's loss to Kansas State isn't horrible to me. I know they dropped pretty severely in the rankings. I think this knocks them out of playoff contention unless things like really go crazy this year. Um, but I don't count it as a terrible loss because you got to think, Kansas State now ranked. again, Kansas State, if they beat Tulane, and that was a pretty close game, is undefeated 4-0 and probably ranked above a couple other teams like Pitt, who are on the top 25, Florida State, who's on the top 25 right now. So I don't think that's a terrible loss. I think they really did play some of their best ball. Texas losing to Tech was probably the worst for me. You can't really bet. Like, you could have justified, okay, we played Bama within 1 point. Maybe we're still a top 25 team. We should be maybe even in the discussion of playoffs, but you'd have to have one out, and losing to Tech is bad. And then Arkansas, I don't think Arkansas or A&M were horrible. I was surprised that Arkansas didn't win that game. I thought Pittman would kind of have his guys up a little more. It's granted two very good teams, but it just felt like they never had a pull away moment, and I definitely thought they would have that.
Yeah, before that game, there were two teams going in very different directions.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing about the way that Texas A&M beat Miami, which we'll get to Miami. Nothing about the way that they beat them really said that they had fixed anything that showed its head during the App State game. And Arkansas, meanwhile, granted, they looked very pedestrian against Missouri State, but they were trending in a much better direction. So you thought going into that game that was going to make some sort of difference. And turns out Jimbo has continued to buy himself some time. I don't know how long. I mean, buy himself some time in the sense before he starts getting asked some really serious questions about the way that he game plans his offense. But
yeah, and I think he's certainly not by any means on the hot seat. Like you look at what his
buyout. So
yeah, well, that and like the argument now becomes, if that ever became the discussion, it's like, well, let's see his recruits materialize, because he did have the number one recruiting class from this past year. Quick fact, by the football transitive property, Southern Mississippi should be ranked number 6 because OU loses to Kansas State. Kansas State lost to Tulane, and then Tulane goes out and loses to Southern Mississippi. It's 14-point favorites. So congrats to Southern Mississippi, ranked number 6 in the nation. According to Stupid Versus the Spread.
Old reliable transitive property that always works out.
As far as other storylines, some teams didn't do so hot. They kind of had like a down-to-earth vibe. This was definitely not the best week to bet favorites, although favorites are still pretty heavily favored. But there was a couple teams, Michigan, Clemson, USC, who didn't cover the spread and maybe didn't look as dominant as they should have, or as we thought they would look like going into a week 4 that had some pretty like strong considerations for matchups. Curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I was definitely on this train as well, but in the top 25 alone, 6-point favorites are greater. Michigan, Clemson, USC, Oregon, Penn State, Ole Miss, and Kentucky, none of them covered. And 4 of those were at home against. So Ole Miss and Kentucky played Tulsa and Northern Illinois, respectively. Yep. And then Penn State had Central Michigan at home. So Michigan was the other team that was at home. They played Maryland, who we both agree is pretty good, and that spread was probably inflated anyway. So overall, was not fun to be a favorite backer, which I have been for most of the season. So definitely made me think twice about some of the favorites this week. As we get into conference play, it should be less of a big deal. But yeah, that was not. It was a little bit of a wake-up call for some of these teams that have been in the top 25 and have been cruising to wins early in the season.
Yeah, and so just a little stat for you. Teams favored by 4+ touchdowns or greater versus other FBS teams this year are 21, 7-1 against the spread. And I think like some of those losses came this past week. So definitely interesting that some guys didn't perform as well as they should have, which I thought was.
Yeah. Got to give credit to Ohio State, though, as 18-point favorites against Wisconsin, who is normally a very good team. To go out and dominate the way that they did.
They absolutely did. And I was surprised at the lackluster. Usually you think Wisconsin has a pretty good defense. Ohio State just absolutely dominated both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I think Yeah, Wisconsin, I'm just not sure that they were able to reload this year. I think Jim Leonard's still a really good coach. I just don't know if they were able to reload in the way that in the offseason the way that I think everybody just sort of expected them to.
Yeah.
More and more quicker and quicker, it's looking like Minnesota is the team to beat in the West. I know Iowa gets a big chance to stake their claim to the West title this week, but um, yeah, Minnesota just absolutely dominated Michigan State, who I don't
Yes.
think is very good, but still credit to Minnesota, and they're a very old team. I think I forget what the quarterback's name is, but that guy's been there for like 9 years. The Ibrahim's back this year, so they've put something together. PJ Fleck has them playing.
Yeah. Yeah. I uh, I was surprised with how lackluster Michigan State looked. Because Mel Tucker over there is a pretty good coach. They seem to have a decent team, but they got mollywopped to say the least. This
Yeah,
past
back to
year.
back weeks now.
Yeah.
I just like. I mean, is it just the uniforms? Like they just look slower. Like
Yeah, they came
maybe
out
it's
sloppy.
maybe it's Michigan State's uniform because Michigan State is never a team that has a lot of team speed, even though they produce a lot of defensive backs proportionally. But they look slow.
Yeah, they didn't look great. And so not that not that Mel Tucker's on the hot seat, is only his sophomore year at Michigan
No, no,
State.
yeah. You want to talk about a guy with an unpayable buyout, especially for
Yeah.
that alumni base.
Yeah. But there were some more moves made this week. So um Geoff Collins over at Georgia Tech is relieved of his duties as head coach. The AD is also fired, so they're going to replace the athletic director and then hire a new coach. Usually, that's how they do it in that order, obviously, so that the AD has basically has his guy. But I don't know who Georgia Tech thinks they're going to get. Like Nebraska is already open, and that's a very proud program. So if you're looking at coaches who are going to sign on for a couple years of rebuilding, I don't know that the first place I think of is Georgia Tech over Nebraska. And then, you got to talk about who's next. Like there's a chance Auburn's head coaching job is available. Brian Harsin, we've talked about it, not doing so hot. I got a buddy over who's well connected with the Auburn fan base that thinks he gets another year, but it all kind of depends on what the president over there and the AD do. And then, Colorado stinks. They might be the worst team in FBS right now. They're doing, I don't think they have a win. Let me check. But Carl Dorrell over there is like basically getting warning shots from press releases. Um, let's look. Colorado football.
Where is the Pac-12? There it is. I'm assuming they play this week. They are 0-4.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Colorado has lost to TCU, Air Force, Minnesota, and UCLA, giving up an average of like 44 points, it looks like, and scoring at most 17 points. That is atrocious.
yeah,
I think Carl Dorrell's probably the next to get fired. I don't know, like that's bad. That's really
yeah.
bad.
That's
And then they play Arizona this week, and then they go on to Cal, Oregon State. That's what would be funny is if they fire him before they play Arizona State, and then we have two interim coaches battling it out on the 29th. That would be fun, actually. I'd watch the shit out of that game. But then
yeah.
they finish up with Oregon, USC, Washington, and Utah. Holy shit. Colorado might not get a win this year unless right now, if Arizona State and Colorado played, Arizona State's favored, correct?
Yeah. They've got to be.
Yeah. Colorado might not win a game. That's fucking crazy. Anyway, so it's a little aside. I don't know if you had any input on coach firing watch, which I
No,
guess we love.
I'm flipping through the conferences. I'll give you three. Actually, I'll give you four because I think the way that Navy season finishes, they're probably not likely
Oh,
to make a change. But Ken Niumatalolo, I forget how you say his name. He could be in trouble there. Um, two intellectual powerhouses. At what point, with very respected coaches, but at what point does anyone ask like David Shaw and Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern and Stanford? What are guys? What are we doing here? Especially Stanford, because I think that they're probably in a better position for success, and they have a larger football pedigree than Northwestern does. So I think at some point, somebody in that administration is probably got to be asking him, when do we get to the point where we turn back around to being competitive? And then I had one other one that I thought of, but it's just
I have one for you. Eli Drinkwitz over at Mizzou. I think
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
I have 13-14 record in 3 seasons now. I don't know that
that's another like under the radar place with a lot of donor
Yeah, I mean SEC football, man.
dynamics. Yeah. They're always like the redheaded stepchild of the SEC to me, but they've got their own special brand of like crazy power struggle going on behind the scenes there too. So yeah, there's your coach watch. We got some names. I think Harsin. I don't care particularly what he does. I think he's done at the end of the year. I think it's just a relationship that's not meant to move forward.
I can see that. Ooh, I got one more for this coach watch. Jeff Scott over at South Florida.
Yeah,
They're getting mollywopped every week, and they're having like embarrassing losses. I wonder what the talent level is there. Like I don't know how long has Jeff Scott been with
I mean
USF?
it's good enough to it's Florida. That was going to be my argument for like Georgia Tech. If you're asking me who has a better potential at actually hitting a rebuild, like does that so the and I don't want to spend too much time in here, but the logical fallacy with me to Nebraska as far as considering a rebuild is does anyone who plays football in a state that produces high end talent actually care about like Tommy Frazier and the early '90s of and Eric Crouch and the early '90s of Nebraska? Like nobody cares. So what?
Yeah,
So they play in a 100,000 seat stadium. I get it. It's probably awesome to go to Lincoln and see a game. I'll give you that. But like, what else about Nebraska, NFL pedigree wise? Like, what NIL money wise? Like, what are they? What are they able to put? I guess they probably have.
They have the whole fucking state to themselves, basically.
Yeah, they have a decent amount of NIL money to throw around, but like besides that, I don't know what else is particularly drawing. Whereas at least at Georgia Tech, you play in a state and in a locality where you have talent and you can attract talent if you brand and recruit the right way. So who knows? But that's the one thing I've never understood with people who say who's going to rescue Nebraska. Like, who is Nebraska actually rescuable at this point? I don't know. Without changing your expectations of what do you expect Nebraska to be, which is probably like an 8-4, 9-3 team that sniffs an upset every once in a while. That's probably the ceiling right now until. Unless like there's a transcendent quarterback or you really start to get it rolling in the right direction.
Yeah.
You would probably say that about Clemson ordinarily, but they've just been there at this point for a decade to where they're entrenched at the top. Unless something like that happened in Nebraska again, I just don't see them returning to that level of competitiveness.
That's fair. I don't hate that take. We'll kind of move on because we don't want to get hung up on the coach watch. I think we talk coaches like every week, so I think we'll just continue talking it. The last segment we'll talk about before getting into the slate, hurricane issues. So this is a two-parter. One, there's a hurricane going to hit Florida. A lot of games might get canceled. If you're putting up bets this week, check like the weather because obviously the hurricane might have residual effects some places. Bad weather means more running, means less points. Just something to keep in mind. And it's also called hurricane issues because holy shit, Miami sucks.
Yeah, my question is Mario Cristobal a soft coach?
I don't want to say yes because he's a good coach.
And he's an
And like,
offensive lineman. Like your instinct is to say no. Like he was an offensive lineman at Miami in like 2002. Like that guy's not a softie. But Oregon last year and now Miami this year, not necessarily in Texas A&M game they played tough, but they got absolutely manhandled. And it consistently has happened over and over again with Mario Cristobal's teams. I agree with you. I don't want to say yes, especially because if he's one of the 7 viewers we have of this show, North Carolina travels there next week. But like it's at this point it keeps happening. And at what point do you start looking at the coach and going, why aren't we playing with the toughness that you expect from a coach or from a team that's coached by an offensive lineman?
yeah, and Tyler Van Dyke didn't have a terrible game. He threw 2 touchdowns, 1 interception.
They benched him in the third quarter, right?
I believe they did, but I don't know why they did because he wasn't playing like bad enough to bench him. They still put up 31. Let's see here. Stats. I mean, he was 16 for 32 with 138 yards. Oh, I stand corrected. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Yeah, that's fucking bad. And then Jake Garcia came in and threw 10 for 19 with 170 yards, no touchdowns. I mean, it seems like they had no running game either. Yeah, I'm looking at the stats here now. They averaged 3 yards, 2 running touchdowns, but that's not a lot for college football. Like, you should be able to, if you're the Miami Hurricanes and your coach is Mario Cristobal, like, you should be blowing Middle Tennessee off the line and running it down their throats, or at least have the capability to do that. And if it works better in the air, then sure. But I don't. I mean, obviously there's some scrutiny there, but it's his first year, so there's certainly not a hot seat situation. But good Lord, like, that's a major upset. And I'm wondering if it's a look ahead, right? Because they did get beaten by A&M in that very terrible performance. And then you have that look ahead for this week for UNC
No,
at home.
next week they get UNC.
Oh, they had a bye and Jesus. Yeah, so they have a bye week this week.
Yeah, they're
So
off.
how do you not wake up after a loss to Texas A&M where you scored 9 total points?
That's a get right game. They you have to. The focus is getting right, and it's very reminiscent of Marcus Freeman, which is not a good
Happy thought.
foreboding experience for me. But yeah, I mean this. I think more alarmingly, obviously, because they got just manhandled by Middle Tennessee, which I don't think anybody would have said that about Notre Dame and Marshall.
No.
So we'll see what happens, but that was a really odd blip.
Yeah, probably one of the worst losses from this. I think that's the worst loss from this week. We didn't talk about it at the top because obviously OU losing to Kansas State isn't that bad. Arkansas being a 2-point dog and losing isn't that bad. And like we said, Tech hates Texas, so it's understandable that they wake up and
I think looking across the board, you would have said the rest of these are not predictable, but you would have if before the weekend started, you would have told me that Kansas State beat OU and Texas Tech beat Texas. I would have said, yeah, that makes sense. And if then you would have told me that Miami would have gotten boat raced by Middle Tennessee State,
by an FCS team.
Yeah, no, they aren't an FCS team. They're a G5 team, but they're FBS.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, they are FBS. Okay.
Yes.
Apologize, Middle Tennessee.
No, they are an FBS team, but still, point is, fun fact.
When was the last bowl Middle Tennessee played in?
Last year, and the only reason I know that is because there was the backup quarterback last year for Middle Tennessee has the same exact name as me, which never happens. He's, I think, the only other one in America with the same exact name as me.
Yeah, they're in Conference USA. I really should have known that. I apologize to all our Middle Tennessee listeners.
Yeah. So anyway, but my point is nobody would have saw that coming.
No, not at all.
Yeah. and that we'll see what happens. Yeah, and then my quick aside on North Carolina losing by 2 touchdowns to Notre Dame. I hope that we've banned Gene Chizik from the campus starting at the end of that game because, like, I can bitch. I could bitch about the refs in that game. There were two very bad calls in the red zone that went against North Carolina that made that score a lot worse than it should have been. But my biggest problem is Gene Chizik is a national title winning coach who is now a special defensive assistant because everybody realized that he can't coach anybody without Cam Newton, and he decided,
Turns out having one of the best
yeah,
college football
players
quarterbacks of all time.
players of all time can make anybody look good. Yeah, because we're seeing it now in that Michael Myers, an All-American first-round NFL draft pick tight end, and he was not open. He was uncovered on 2 scores.
One would think that's bad.
2. They lost by 13.
Fool me once.
Anyway.
Sucks to suck. Yeah, I mean, Tulane lost their homecoming 14-point favorites.
That's
disgusting.
Rough. Not a good week for us.
No, bad.
Let's turn the page. Let's get on to this week.
Turning the page. Okay, so this week, games. So we're going to talk Friday slate because there's a great Friday slate. We're very lucky. And then we'll get into the big matchups of the week. So this Friday slate. So Thursday is a stinker, Utah State at BYU. Nothing special, BYU. I have a play minus 24. I'm betting BYU, but I'm probably more focused on Thursday Night Football. It'll be on the small TV. Let's put it that way. And then this Friday slate, so Tulane at Houston. Tulane is plus 2.5. You have UTSA at Middle Tennessee, who we just talked about. UTSA is only 4-point favorites. San Diego State, Boise State, they hate each other to my knowledge. And then Washington at UCLA. UCLA is plus 3.5. And then there's New Mexico and UNLV. But there's out of those, I can tell you the Tulane-Houston game is going to be great because I don't think Houston's as good as people think, and both these teams have a great way of playing to their talent. So it'll be fun to see two teams who play to their talent play each other and, in theory, match talent. So it'll be I think that'll be a fun game to watch. That's the earlier kickoffs. UTSA, Middle Tennessee, great matchup of like lesser-known college football teams. As we obviously just heard me talking about Middle Tennessee, but UTSA, not a bad team coming out of San Antonio for their second or third year as a football
player. Third Division I year, third FBS year.
Yeah. So I mean, they've been fun to watch. Played people pretty close. This should be a fun game, and then. You're looking at a 7 p.m. kickoff for the San Diego State Boise State game. That'll be fun. Into the 9:30 kick for Washington UCLA, which I think will be a brutal matchup. I think both are physical teams that like to they like to pass, but I don't want to say they like to run the ball because it's college football and you tend to air it out a little more and spread things out just because it's difficult to cover. But both 4-0 teams, both great teams. 9:30 kickoff, 10:30 kickoff Eastern.
10:30 kickoff, yeah, Eastern. 9:30 Pacific.
And I mean that's a great Friday night cap before waking up and watching a whole day of college football.
Yeah, I mean you're gonna need some coffee the following morning because that gets started late. But should be a lot of fun, especially that UCLA Washington game. Michael Penix has been really good. You have to give him credit. So they go south to LA. Should be a fun one as far just to see because UCLA is 4-0. They haven't lost, but they have not looked like the team that anybody really thought they could be this year. Mm-hmm. So they get Washington home, who obviously they're riding that Michigan State win to where they are in the polls right now. This one that should come down to the wire. Some craziness might happen in that game. San Diego State, Boise State. I just, as a word of caution, both of those teams are awful, very bad. San Diego State.
They hate each other. That was my point. Not that they're
Yes.
good.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you're going to that game expecting to see some high quality football, change the channel.
I don't think Boise is covered this year.
No, they gave up a horrible punt return this past week. I forget who they were playing. I'm gonna look it up right now because it was so bad.
Oh,
It
that's
was they kicked it was like a 39-yard. Yeah, they fired their offensive coordinator this week too. Oh, they lost to UTEP. Yeah, they gave up a horrible 40. So it was a 47-yard punt return. So they were punting from far enough inside their own half that the ball didn't make the 50, and then they gave up the punt return for the touchdown.
oh,
So that's why I say that game is. And San Diego State, meanwhile, got blown out by. They lost to Arizona, and got blown out by Utah very badly. So, or watch at your own risk for those two games, or for that game for those two teams.
yeah. The UCLA Washington game should be a lot of fun. I mean, looking across the board, UCLA likes to run it a little more. Washington passes it a little more. I think it'll be a fun physical game, though. I think
Yes.
that's probably definitely a game to watch Friday. And also, honestly, Houston Tulane. I think I have a feeling like something crazy is going to happen in that game. So we'll see. All right, so let's get into Saturday slate. Like always, we're kind of picking out like the top 25 matchups. Maybe not like the closest on the spread, but we're talking, the top 25 matchups of ranked teams. So noon kickoffs for the following games: Kentucky at Ole Miss and Michigan at Iowa. Those are our noon kickoffs that we'll talk about. Kentucky at Ole Miss. Kentucky's a 6.5-point dog. Going to Ole Miss. I think this is like the litmus test. I know we don't hate the AP poll, but sometimes they really get it wrong. Where it's funny to me that odds makers always have a better pulse on what the better team is usually, because Kentucky's ranked what 7th or 8th right now.
7.
And
Yeah, Kentucky's
Ole Miss-
7, Ole Miss 14, but the line says obviously differently. Now, part of that is this game is in Oxford. But yeah,
But that's not 6.5 points. Like that doesn't account for 6.5 points. So they obviously bookmakers think Kentucky's worse. I'm taking the points with Kentucky, but I'm curious if you're on the opposite side.
no, I'm not. I'm with you. It's I think Ole Miss wins this game, but I think Kentucky keeps it within the number. Just because I think Kentucky's a very hard nosed football team that's very tough to play against. They get Chris Rodriguez back this week, which is a huge get for them, coming off a suspension. So Kentucky should be a little bit more prolific offensively. They got past their look ahead spot last week. I think they keep this within the number. I think this could be a 3-point game. Ole Miss, I think, is like I said, I think they're going to win this game because I think they're a really, really, really good football team that nobody's really talked about this year because they haven't played anybody. This will sort of put them on the national map because I think everybody expected them to really take a step back without Matt Corral and the way that the offense played last year. But I think that Lane Kiffin's got the transfers working. They've played well for the most part this year. They didn't cover against Tulsa last week, but I think that this is a game they win. They win a close one, but that's why I'm taking Kentucky with the points.
Yeah, I just feel like if it's an SEC matchup and the opponent isn't Vanderbilt, Georgia, or Alabama, you almost certainly take a harder look at taking the points because a lot of these teams, I mean, there's a lot of hate around the SEC, and these teams usually play each other pretty close. So I agree. I think Kentucky 6.5 is a lot. I don't see Ole Miss pulling away by 7 unless there's like a late score. But I think it should be a fun game. And then Michigan at Iowa. Iowa scored some points this past week, which was weird to see on offense.
On Rutgers.
Yeah, that was a good game. But Now they're back home playing Michigan. I think this is so. Michigan's minus 10.5. I think what people are expecting is like Michigan to struggle on offense because of Iowa's defense and special teams. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Michigan kind of comes out and pulls away with this one. Um, you know, they are very much to me number 4 ranked right now. I think they're the 4th best team in the nation, only behind Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State. Um, they just have they definitely have shown their offensive capabilities, and I don't know that Iowa's the schemes that they run are going to hold up against a very good Michigan team, and they're going to wake up for this game. This will be like the big noon kickoff. Like if you're not watching Kentucky at Ole Miss, like this will be the game to watch. So I very much think Michigan pulls away with this one. I'm curious if you had any doubt.
I was originally on Iowa and I took it off the card, and the reason I say that is as it's a 10.5 point line, but it somehow feels like a trap for the underdog, which doesn't make any sense. But hear me out. So Iowa, Iowa's in their last. I saw the stat on Twitter. I forget who it was. Don't yell at me. Um, I they've played in their last 6 home games against top 5 opponents. They're 5-1 outright. Or either outright or against the spread. I got to double check. I think it's against the spread. Um, but 5-1 in their last 6 home games against top 5 opponents against the spread. So you think about that, and 10.5 with the way that Iowa plays defense, playing at home, feels like it's such a preposterously high number that you want to take Iowa easily. But then so my thought is that that's the reason that the line is set where it is. Because if you were to ask me to set the line for this game, coming off of the way that Michigan played Maryland, what is it, 7.5, 8,
Yeah,
somewhere in there.
yeah.
So 2 extra points to get it within 2 scores for Iowa feels like a weird set line by the odds makers. I don't know what it opened at, but
I think it
um,
opened at around 10.5. So my only other note for this, I I don't know that Iowa can score on offense. Like I've never seen a team that is so heavily reliant on defensive and special team scores that, like, in my mind, if Michigan scores 2 touchdowns and a field goal, like I don't know that Iowa comes back against this Michigan defense. I I don't. There's nothing about this Iowa offense that would give me confidence that as soon as Michigan hits that number, like you could have a backdoor cover or you could like have something happen where Iowa would then come back and score.
yeah, my only concern is if Iowa gets up on a special teams or defensive touchdown early, you have JJ McCarthy as a sophomore quarterback in his first true road start against what we would all consider to be a top 10 defense
Yeah,
in a tough place to play. So
that's
that's
true.
so if you get Michigan in a negative game script, there's a chance that this becomes an easier. I mean, really, the only chance Iowa has to win this game or really cover it is if they go ahead early and force Michigan to play from behind. Now, regardless, Michigan has the talent to do it either way. But I think the only way they stay inside the number here is if they can get ahead and then start to play time of possession, run the ball, control the clock. So I don't think I'm going to play it on either side. But I put myself in a pretzel on this one. I think Michigan's probably the right play here. I wouldn't be surprised if it stays close early. I would be curious what the first half line is. But I think Michigan eventually pulls away.
All right, moving on. Alabama at Arkansas and Wake at Florida State. We'll do Alabama at Arkansas, 3:30 kickoff first. This is your SEC big like 2:30, 3:30 p.m. kickoff before the night games. Arkansas obviously coming off a tough loss at A&M that arguably if a kicker it does a little better, they win. Not going to put it all on a kicker, obviously. And Alabama obviously coming off pretty dominant just wins against teams that aren't Alabama before this SEC matchup. I'll let you go first because I want to hear what your opinion on it is. But I'm worried about this game, but I do have a pick.
So I'm going to do the same thing I just did with Michigan and Iowa, where your instinct says 17 is too much for a team that was just ranked in the top 10 at home against Alabama. But my in my head, it feels like an inflated line where most of the money will be on Arkansas. Alabama, if they're going to figure it out, they're going to figure it out against this Arkansas secondary, passing wise, with their wide receivers, because Arkansas secondary is very bad. The rest of their defense plays like their hair's on fire, but their secondary is terrible. Um, so if you put those together against a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback against a very bad secondary, the instant, and really it's just, to me it's more, I think this line's probably higher than it otherwise would have been. It's just the way that Arkansas lost that game, like we talked about earlier, the psychological impact of losing a game like that, the way that they lost it. Really, it makes it tough to get off the mat here. The one thing I will say is in favor of Arkansas keeping this game close is that KJ Jefferson's a pretty experienced quarterback. They have a big offensive line that they may be able to run the ball in the similar way that we saw Texas be able to maintain some sort of possession and control the clock. It's going to be absolutely crucial for Arkansas to be able to generate drives that last at least 3 to 4 sets of downs on a consistent basis. Because if they can't get to a point where they're keeping Alabama's defense on the field for a relatively consistent amount of time, this might be a 30-40 point game, just because there's a chance Alabama scores not every time they go down the field, but if they find somebody to pick on in the secondary, this could get ugly really fast.
Yeah.
I'm staying completely away from it. I would probably say Alabama, just because I think public money would also be on Arkansas here as a home dog. There's no real look ahead spots in the SEC, but I'm not touching this.
I have a lean. I'm probably not betting it, but if it goes up, I might look at it again. I like Arkansas in this spot. I think this is like, if Sam Pittman is the leader that I think he is, and he's a very good football coach, he gets these guys up for this game after a. You saw it in the faces of the players last week, like the devastating loss. Like they really thought they were going to go into Jerry World and win, and I think coming off of that loss,
And probably should have. I think that's what hurts
and
the most.
probably should have. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I felt so bad when they panned to the kicker and he was like almost in tears. Um, like this seems like to me, it seems like Sam Pittman can keep this within 2 touchdowns. Do they win? Maybe if they scheme exactly how Texas did and get maybe an off script Alabama. But I don't think they'll. I don't think they'll come out on top. But 16 right now seems like a lot. If it gets up to 17 or even 17 and a half, which I think it might honestly do later in the week because of how people bet on Alabama so much. I'm probably going to bet it, but I do like Arkansas in this spot. You know, Alabama's certainly not going to look ahead, but I think if you can expose some of their weaknesses that they showed during that Texas game, you might be able to give them a run for their money.
Yeah, no, I will say there's definitely a path to them keeping this game close. I don't know if they have the juice to win it, but especially defensively. But there's a path to them keeping this game close with the size of their offensive line, and if they can establish the running game, I think that they will definitely keep this within 2 scores. I just don't feel confident enough to bet it, and it feels like. Um, I was on the right side of it last year, but the Arkansas getting a lot of hype going to Sanford Stadium last year, played Georgia, and they looked like they didn't know their ass from their elbow, and they got absolutely housed by a much now. Granted, pretty much everybody not named Alabama that happened to against Georgia last year, but It reminds me of that, where is Arkansas ready to step up and play one of the national title contenders, and that you could be in a situation where you blank and it's 21-0. You're like, how did
Yeah.
we get here? So all that makes me say I'm going to sit back, relax, listen to the CBS theme song if I'm not at UNC Virginia Tech, and enjoy this game.
All right, next game up, Wake at Florida State. Another matchup of two pretty damn good teams. I think this one's pretty exciting. I don't know that it has obviously playoff implications, but still a fun matchup and a good fight of two ACC teams, right? Florida State is ACC.
Yes.
So I mean this will have effects on who makes the ACC championship game. Let's put it that way. With Wake's loss to Clemson and Florida State's 3-1.
No, they're 4-0.
Oh shit, that's right. I forgot. I really should look this shit up before I fucking speak my mind. But Wake is favored, correct? Or am I
No, Florida State minus 6.5.
Okay.
The total is 65.5. This feels like exactly like Florida Tennessee last week, where it's, and only in the sense of I have no idea what's going to happen here. And it could, all of the things that I think could happen could all happen at once, all together simultaneously. Like this game is a mescaline trip from space that's very appropriate for Tallahassee and could just be absolutely nuts. All of that I say to say, don't touch it. Enjoy it. If you wanna root for the over and the points, take that. But this, I could see Wake winning by 14. I could see Florida State winning by 21. I could see this game coming down to a field goal off the top of an upright. I don't know what is going to happen in this game. If you're looking for a side to play, he's a road dog, but you take the more experienced quarterback in Sam Hartman. So no clue. Don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of note, this is one of the games threatened by the hurricane.
Yes.
Whether they move this or cancel it, I think they're kind of debating both. Like Florida State already canceled classes for this week, so it'll be interesting to see if this hurricane has an effect, which would be shitty. But obviously, you still have to play this game at some point, I believe. So they might even reschedule it just because it's an interconference matchup. But I don't have a play for it either. I mean, maybe take the points and hope for a shootout.
Yeah, they might move this to like Jacksonville, although I think the Jags are at home, which may make it difficult. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how the conferences, they all do it differently when they schedule like a last minute change. But either way, I think it's gonna be a great game. I'll probably be flipping between this and the Alabama game, depending on what the score is. But I could see either of these teams winning, to be honest. I think they're two pretty good teams. And I think, Wake's obviously only loss being to Clemson, who's ranked number 5 right now, really does show like the capability that, and Wake keeping it within 7, the capability of that team. So I think it'll be a fun matchup.
Wake, the only reason this is a touchdown is because there's this is a touchdown line because this game's going to end on a touchdown. Like, I don't know how, like, putting this within a field goal is basically making it a pick 'em. Even if you made it 3.5, it's a pick 'em
Right.
because whoever scores is going to win.
Right. Yeah. I know what you're saying in that regard. Okay. Last matchup of the week. Arguably the best matchup of the week. North Carolina State at Clemson. 7:30 kickoff. I got 2 undefeated teams, both within the top 10. This should be an awesome, awesome, awesome game. I sneaky messed this up when we were doing our previews when we did all the previews, you and I, because I overlooked NC State pretty big And then I went back and I listened to other podcasts, and I heard people talking about NC State and how prolific their offense is, and we've seen it, with the exception of them playing East Carolina, who's a very good team within 1 point. They scored 55, 41, 35, or 27 points against Texas Tech, who just beat Texas, who's a very good team. So
Yeah, I mean they scored 27 against Texas Tech, but they also only gave up 7, and that game was never close. NC
yeah,
State punked Texas Tech.
yeah. So I think this is going to be an awesome matchup. I'm curious if you had any leans, any bets, or what you're looking at from this game.
I don't have bets. I only have picks in North Carolina because it's not legal to gamble. I go to Virginia, but I am going to take NC State here plus 6.5. And this is just me. I fully admit this is me refusing to give up on my assertion that DJ is not a very good quarterback. And I think they played well, definitely, obviously played well enough to win last week in a double overtime thriller in Winston Salem, but not a particularly difficult place to play. This is a team that can disrupt them defensively and beat them offensively. And to me, I think this game the most likely outcomes are a North Carolina State win and a Clemson very, very, very close win. I think those are. I think if this game, North Carolina State has been looking forward to this game all year,
All year. Yep.
all year,
100%.
all year. So yes, Clemson will be fired up. They're probably the best team they're going to play this whole year. But that doesn't matter because NC State has been looking forward to this game for months and months and months. So all that says to me, Clemson may still win this game. I'll admit that's certainly possible, but I don't think they keep it outside of a full touchdown. I don't think DJ is the better quarterback in this game. I think Devin Leary is the better quarterback in this game. I think NC State is a really, really good defense. We saw that Clemson's defense is definitely vulnerable last week to a veteran quarterback who can make throws down the field, which is exactly what Devin Leary is. So I like NC State in this spot. I like them plus 6.5. Over under 42 feels low just because this game is probably going to require points to win it. But I'm going to take NC State plus 6.5, and I may actually add the over.
Yeah, so my play is both NC State and the over. I like them both. I think 42 points is way too low, even though these are two good defenses. But this is the only game that Clemson has remaining with a ranked team aside from Florida State in mid-October. So I think NC State has had this pinned on the wall since last year. I think they might sneaky be a top 5 team, and I think they come out with a win. I might sprinkle money line NC State. That's how confident that I am that they will beat Clemson. I haven't liked Clemson's performances against teams that are good. Right? They started out and they crushed Georgia Tech, who just fired their coach. Then they play two teams.
They didn't crush Georgia Tech until the third quarter.
Right.
You remember they went in up a touchdown at the half to a team that is now coachless.
Correct. And then they beat up on Furman, Louisiana Tech before almost losing, obviously going into overtime against Wake, where, arguably Wake looked like the better team. And I think going from that game, overtime, away, little rest, and then coming into this week and playing one of the best, easily one of the top 10 teams in the nation, I think Clemson loses outright. I'm marking it on the map. I'm not gonna bet heavy on the money line, but I'm gonna sprinkle it. You had anything to add?
Nope, that's it.
I think fun times. Okay, let's get into our picks for the week. Last segment here, picks of the week. I am 26, 18, and 1. I was up 4 units because my play of the month and or year won. And I'll talk about that real quick. But Utah minus 16-1. And I have another one with a similar situation as that bet and that kind of logic where a fired coach, you play a good team plays a fired coach and you bet heavily on that team that's going up against a fired team. This is not the NFL. There's no like interim lined up, so usually those teams struggle for a few weeks after that. So I'll go through my picks and then you can do yours. You want to go back to back? Okay. Yeah. Let's do it. Okay, Thursday, BYU minus 24 against Utah State. BYU's home, and they're a much better team. This is like that 4 touchdown stat I gave. They're a lot of teams are covering as large favorites, so I like BYU. I like UTSA against Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee coming off a big win. I don't think they get up for this game. I think UTSA pulls it away minus 5.5. I like Washington minus 3 at UCLA. Washington is a very good team, and people are overlooking them a little bit because they play so late. But they're going to crush UCLA. That's a rivalry. Don't convince yourself it's not. I think Washington comes out minus 3. I like Michigan minus 5.5, as we talked about at Iowa. Iowa can't score. Air Force minus 15.5 versus Navy. That is the first game of 3 of the Commanders Cup, where the Army, Air Force, and Navy teams all play each other for the President's Cup. Commanders Cup? Yeah, Commanders Cup. To see who's the best service academy. This is the first year that Air Force has been good in years. I think Air Force comes out and beats the ever-loving shit out of Navy, who might fire their coach later on. Oklahoma minus 5 at TCU in a bounce back. There's not much to say other than they're a good team and they got beat, and they're going to be angry, and they're going to come out and win. I have Kentucky plus 6.5 at Ole Miss. We talked about that. Kansas State minus 7.5 versus Texas Tech. So Kansas State's at home. Both coming off
double letdown spot.
Yeah, here's the logic. So Kansas State, usually this would be a letdown spot. You're just coming off a big win. But Texas Tech just beat Texas at home for the first time in like a decade. So I think they are spent. I think the hangover is lasting 6 days over in Lubbock, Texas, before they get on the plane.
No, they're still drunk. Yeah,
and I think they get to a ranked Kansas State and they get their ass kicked. Reverse on this kind of mentality, Texas State plus 21 at JMU. JMU coming off a huge comeback, which we didn't really talk about, but they were down, ironically, 28-3. Came back, won the game. I like Texas State. JMU came back against App State. So
against App State and Boone, finally.
Yeah. We were
fell off the bus. And,
well, we were vindicated. It still was much watched television. It just wasn't must watch because App State won at the end.
Yeah.
Utah minus 11 against Oregon State. Utah's on a roll. They've been hot ever since their first loss earlier in the season, and I like them coming out 11-point favorites against Oregon State. ISU minus 3.5 at Kansas. I think Iowa State's just a better team. I know they kind of struggled a little bit this past week, but I think they'll fix themselves, get right. Arkansas plus 16 against Bama. We talked about that. Baylor minus 2.5 against Oak State. Baylor's a better team. UCF minus 3.5 versus SMU. SMU kind of stinks. They're not good. I was a believer in them early on.
Sonny Dykes was important.
Yes. So I think they pull away. I have A&M plus 3. Coastal Carolina minus 10. Coastal Carolina sneaky good cover team. UTEP minus 3 against Charlotte.
Except when I need them against Buffalo in a horrible beat.
Yeah, that was tough. UTEP minus 3. LSU minus 7.5 at Auburn. Auburn stinks.
Yeah.
And this is an SEC team. Brian Kelly's going to right the ship eventually, most likely. And he'll bat away some of the mentality about his team and his persona. I think they go in and they crush Auburn, and I think maybe we're talking about Brian Harsin again next week. NC State +7 against Clemson. Talked about it. UGA, Georgia, -28 at Missouri. Again, this leans into the stat. Missouri's not good. Georgia's very fucking good. And 4 touchdown favorites. They're gonna beat the loving shit out of them.
Yeah, this is only at this number because they didn't cover Kent State last week and then they go on the road. Don't think, just throw. UGA is 28 points better than Missouri. Take the number.
Yes, they are. Texas in a bounce back, -10 at West Virginia.
No, I think they're at home.
Are they? Either way.
Yeah.
Don't care. Like Texas in this spot. My game of the week, Pitt, -20 at Georgia Tech. Every time a coach is fired this year and they have that team plays, they're playing against a ranked team, and they get their ass kicked. It happened last week at Utah. It's going to happen this week at Pitt. I'm probably putting 2 to 3 units on Pitt, -20. This line should be 28, but it won't be because that's where the line opened, and they won't move the line for a while. Arizona -7.5 against Colorado. Colorado fucking sucks. They are bad. Bet against Colorado. They cannot cover. They cannot win. USC -24 against ASU. Same mentality. ASU still hasn't really named an interim that's worth a shit. USC -24 coming off of a stagger where they should have crushed the team they played. And then Oregon -16 at Stanford to finish up the card. Those are all my picks. I'm betting every single one of them. It's a lot.
Oregon's actually at home, -16.5 against Stanford.
Even better.
Yeah, USC is already up to 27. So
get it while it's hot, baby.
Yeah,
all right,
exactly.
I still like it at 27. I still like it. I like it at 31. If the line is 31, reevaluate. USC is that good though.
Yeah,
and ASU is that bad.
Yes, I agree. I don't know if ASU is that bad. That's my only concern. My only concern is I'm going to look dumb. It's my only concern. I have left them off the card this week. USC finally burned me. I've left them off the card for the week. Short card, 10 plays here this week. Georgia -28. We talked about it at Mizzou. Don't think, just throw. Oregon at home, 16.5 points versus Stanford. Stanford's very bad. Oregon has nobody on their schedule for a while. They have no reason to be looking ahead of anybody on their schedule. Take Oregon -16.5 versus Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
With you on Oklahoma, I see it at -6.5 as of right now. At TCU, Oklahoma's really good. TCU's not as good. Take Oklahoma -6.5. I'm with you on Kentucky +6.5, like we talked about at Ole Miss. Also with you on Pitt -23.5 versus Georgia Tech. Utah, Oregon State. I don't know what's going to happen with the spread there. I think you're probably right, but I think the more intriguing number, Utah, Oregon State under 56. Oregon State just held USC to 17 points. Granted, that game was at home. They go on the road to Utah, but Utah has not been blowing teams out because they have been putting up a ton of points. They've been blowing teams out because they don't let up a ton of points. I think 56 is a large number for these two teams. I think expect this to stay like 21-10, 21-17, somewhere in that number, like the under there.
You know what? I'm switching my pick. I'm taking yours. Under 56.
Yeah, sticking with the unders, I'm going to take A&M Mississippi State under 45.5. Neither of these offenses have proved they can score against SEC West teams. Specifically, Mississippi State couldn't score against LSU. A&M hasn't been able to put up more than 21 points against anybody. I like under 45.5 here. NC State +6.5 at Clemson. We already talked about. May add the over there as well, 42.5. How those two totals are flipped doesn't make any sense to me. How Clemson, NC State at total 42.5, but A&M Mississippi State is 45.5, despite the fact that we all know that A&M can't score, and Mississippi State hasn't scored against anybody in the SEC West so far. And then my final play, I hate to say it, I'm going to hold my nose. I don't like it. UNC -9, we get Virginia Tech at home. Brent Pry's team is terrible, especially on offense. And granted, UNC is abysmal on defense. We talked about Gene Chizik. Guy needs to be shot into the sun. But as bad as UNC is on defense, I think Virginia Tech's that bad on offense. And Drake May played very well. They had a garbage time touchdown that got him into the 30s against Notre Dame, which is a very good defense. But Drake May, we didn't lose that game because of Drake May. We lost that game because Gene Chizik somehow has never heard of an All-American tight end. But my point is, take UNC. They're 10 points better than Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is not a very good football team. UNC is 10 points better. Take them. Then they go to Miami in another game that's winnable. We'll talk about that next week. There's my card.
Boom. All right. What's your parlay?
I'm not playing a parlay this week. I've been getting killed on it. So I forgot to give my record. I'm 23 and 25 overall, 47%, but the parlay's down 2.6 units because of an 0-3 week last week. It was USC, Kentucky, and Ole Miss, which were Kentucky and Ole Miss were in mutual look-ahead spots, which was a huge miss by me. I don't know how I missed that, but they were in mutual look-ahead spots to each other, and both lost. So really tough week for me. I'm staying away from the parlays. I'll wait some other picks in here. But yeah, got to change some things up because last week was a rough one.
All right. Well, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in. Stick by for tomorrow's probable release of our takes on NFL. Had a bad beat this fine evening, recording on Monday. But that has been Stupid versus the Spread. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. New episodes come out every week. One for college football, one for NFL. Laters.